ब्रजजनरञ्जन यशोदानन्दन ब्रजजनरञ्जन यमुनतीरावनचारि यमुनतीरावनचारि जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन ब्रजजनरञ्जन यशोदानंदन ब्रजजनरञ्जन यमुनतीरावनचारि यमुनतीरावनचारि जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा श्रील प्रभुपदा जय विश्वपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक सदस्य श्री भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। इस्कॉन संस्था का श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक सदस्य श्रीमद् भक्तिवेदांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विश्वपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक श्री गौर किशोरदास महाराज की जय। जय विश्वपाद सच्चिदानंद साई भक्ति ठाकुर की जय। जय विश्वपाद वैष्णव सार्वभौम जगन्नाथ दास महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप सनातन भट्टर गुणाय जीव गोपाल भट्टदास गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य श्रीदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से गो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री राधा शिव गौरी भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपिना श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरिवर्धन की जय। श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोरेश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। कंकमाई की जय। अमन माई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंतपुरी वैष्णव की जय। श्री हरनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। ISKCON Batman Guruvant ki Samaj Bhaktivinoda ki jai। Gaur Premanande Hari Hari। All glories to the assembly. This all glories to the assembly. This all glories to the assembly. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Shri Prabhupada ki jai। Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya। Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya। Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Ashtaprayeshu Patreshu Nityam Bhagavati Sevya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtihi. Hare Krishna. Welcome you all to this Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are discussing from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 27, text number 5. Ateva Shanaischittam Prasaktam Asatam Pati Bhakti Yogena Tivrena Viraktya Chana Nayed Vasham Ateva Shanaischittam Prasaktam Asatam Pati Bhakti Yogena Tivrena Viraktya Chana Nayed Vasham Ateva Shanaischittam Prasaktam Asatam Pati Bhakti Yogena Tivrena Viraktya Chana Nayed Vasham. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. It is the duty of every conditioned soul to engage his polluted consciousness, which is now attached to material enjoyment, in very serious devotional service with detachment. Thus his mind and consciousness will be under full control. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The process of liberation is very nicely explained in this verse. The cause of one's becoming conditioned by material nature is his thinking himself the enjoyer, the proprietor, or the friend of all living entities. This false thinking is a result of contemplation on sense enjoyment. When one thinks that he is the best friend to his countrymen, to society, or to humanity, and he engages in various national, philanthropic, and altruistic activities, all that is just so much concentration on sense gratification. The so-called national leader or humanist does not serve everyone. He serves his senses only. That is a fact. But the conditioned soul cannot understand this because he is bewildered by the spell of material nature. It is therefore recommended in this verse that one engage very seriously in the devotional service of the Lord. This means that one should not think that he is the proprietor, benefactor, friend, or enjoyer. He should always be cognizant that the real enjoyer is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the basic principle of Bhakti Yoga. One must be firmly convinced of these three principles. One should always think that Krishna is the proprietor, Krishna is the enjoyer, and Krishna is the friend. Not only should he understand these principles himself, but he should try to convince others and propagate Krishna consciousness. As soon as one engages in such serious devotion service of the Lord, naturally the propensity to falsely claim lordship over material nature disappears. That detachment is called vairagya. Instead of being absorbed in so-called material lordships, one engages in Krishna consciousness, that is control of consciousness. The yoga process necessitates controlling the senses. Yoga indriya samyamaha. Since the senses are always active, their activity should be engaged in devotional service. One cannot stop their activities. If one wants to artificially stop the activities of the senses, his attempt will be a failure. Even the great yogi Vishwamitra, who was trying to control his senses by the yoga process, fell victim to the beauty of Menaka. There are many such instances. Unless one's mind and consciousness are fully engaged in devotional service, there is always the opportunity for the mind to become occupied with desires for sense gratification. One particular point mentioned in this verse is very significant. It is said here, prasaktam asatam patihi. The mind is always attracted by asat, a temporary material existence. Because we have been associated with material nature since time immemorial, we have become accustomed to our attachment to this temporary material nature. The mind has to be fixed at the eternal lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Savai mana Krishna padara vindayoho. One has to fix the mind at the lotus feet of Krishna, then everything will be very nice. Thus, the seriousness of Bhakti Yoga is stressed in this verse. Om Jnanati Mirandasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshur Militam Vena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Vishnu Sthapitam Vena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamukhyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Patakamelam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Satrajatam Sarvana Raghunatantam Tam Sijivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Ragana Lalita Shri Vishakam Ye Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Kopisha Gauka Kanta Radha Kanta Mostiti Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanishde Vanmami Haripriya Vancha Palita Kripasindhubhyo Vicha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Moham Karu Devachalam Pangam Nandi Digam Padamam Nande Shri Guru Dharma Paramadamandam Shri Chaitanya Mission. Hare Krishna. So here we see in this particular verse, it's mentioned as to how every conditioned soul is got a polluted consciousness due to material enjoyment. But with practice of devotional service and detachment, one has to bring this mind and consciousness under control. So the process of liberation from this material world is mentioned in this verse. Now, in simple terms, liberation, mukti or liberation means freedom from material contamination. And when one is liberated, one does not have to take birth again in this material world again and again. So why we take birth in this material world is, as mentioned here, from time immemorial, we have been conditioned to engage our consciousness in polluted or rather material matters. We consider ourselves to be enjoyer, we have false proprietorship, and we think everything belongs to us. We have several attachments. One is our attachment to our body. We don't understand who we are, that we are actually not this body, but a spirit soul. Then that extends to our house. From us, our attachment extends to our family members, wife, children, etc. And then when wife are there, when there is an husband and wife, then there is a necessity for home. So become attached to that house. This house is mine, that house is yours, so forth. So from from body becomes extended to family. Then from family, we need a house. Then when we have house, we need today a lot of paraphernalia. In the Esther years, people used to keep cows, elephants, etc. Nowadays, that cows and elephants have been replaced by cars, and people have a habit of keeping cats and dogs. So this is the other paraphernalia that is required in the house. And it is not very easy to maintain this paraphernalia. Then beyond this is our attachment goes to society, friends, etc. Because when we possess, we also need to show it to somebody. So we develop a circle of friends, relatives, and then it gets extended. Our social life also becomes elaborate, because unless and until we exhibit what we have, we cannot be satisfied. This is due to our ego. So we have developed this attachment, so forth, in so many lifetimes. But one has to become free from all these by performance of devotional service. Now, nothing actually belongs to us. If you look at whether it is our body, or it's our family, or our possessions, or all whatever social life, nothing belongs to us. Actually, Krishna is the only one to whom everything belongs to. He can take away these things at any point of time. Even if we think that I can drive down from here to, say, Mysore on my own capacity or individual capability, Krishna can make anything happen. Even we can meet with an accident, we may not even reach Mysore at a decided point of time, or anything can happen. So nothing is in our hands. So, but we falsely tend to think everything belongs to us and we want to enjoy everything. We have developed this polluted consciousness. So example is given in Srimad Bhagavatam as to how Parikshit Maharaj, the moment he realized that he has been, he'll be leaving his body in 7 days' time, he quit everything, his family, his palace, all the paraphernalia. He had to elaborate many thousands of elephants, horses, etc. And he had a huge kingdom, but he left everything in no point of time, because he realized that if he has to leave his body, there's no point in keeping attachment to these things. So similarly, nothing belongs to us. They come to us by the mercy of the Lord for a period of time. to be utilized in the service of the Lord. But the moment we tend to use these in our own, for our own sense gratification, then it becomes difficult to free ourselves from this attachment. For example, we might get attached to a car. Now, by the moment we become attached, it takes any form of attachment that carry in this material world, it takes us to the next birth automatically. So in the next birth, we might develop an attachment for a car of this type. By the time technology would have changed, everything would have changed. But that attachment for that car continues birth after birth. Similarly, it's not only the car, attachment to so many things material take us, or rather bring us to a conditional stage, life after life, and this has been going on. But one should take examples that are given in Srimadam Bhagavatam, like that of Parikshit Maharaj, who immediately left everything and came to the bank to hear Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami. So one is there is a true shelter and there are false shelters. All the material objects that we take shelter of, they are all temporary in nature. That's what is mentioned here. Asat. Asat means temporary. So we take shelter of all these false objects and remain conditioned here. Whereas the true shelter is none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself. So here it is mentioned as to how to obtain mukti. So by performance of devotion service, very seriously, one can get liberation from this material world. Now, there are many impersonalists who tend to want to merge into the spiritual existence to end their individual existence. But according to Srimad Bhagavatam, sorry, 1 minute, I just connect my charger. Yeah, but as for Srimad Bhagavatam, mukti is only an initial stage for one to be liberated. When one takes up the process of devotion service, he is awarded only the liberation to be free from these material miseries. That is because that is our normal condition to be engaged in devotion service. So there is a quote in the Puranas that a devotee is simply satisfied by being engaged in devotion service. He does not aspire for any liberation from material condition life. In other words, when one is engaged in devotion service, he does not have to separately aspire for mukti because it's already given to him. So this consciousness is actually originally pure, but due to sense gratification, this contamination of consciousness has happened. Now, what is the reason for this contaminated consciousness is mentioned here. We falsely tend to think that we are the enjoyer, we are the proprietor, or we are the friend of all the living entities. We think because we try to work very hard, we think that because I have worked hard and I have got the fruits, now I must enjoy the fruit of my activities. So we think we are the enjoyers, but actually we are not. The Lord is the only enjoyer. And when we offer everything to the Lord, considering him to be the enjoyer, then automatically we also take pleasure from that. Then we consider ourselves to be the proprietor of everything that we have. Krishna can take away anything from us at any point of time. And we consider ourselves to be the friend of all living entities. We cannot do anything to anyone without the sanction of Krishna. So ultimately, he's the cause of all causes. So this false thinking of to be the enjoyer, proprietor, and friend is our cause for conditioning in this material world. But when one thinks that Krishna is the best friend, or Krishna is the enjoyer, and Krishna is the proprietor, then that is a correct understanding or perfection of understanding. But a conditioned soul being bewildered by this material nature cannot understand this. Therefore, it is necessary for us to be engaged in devotional service with detachment. Then our mind and our consciousness will be under full control. But at the same time, if we are very casual in the performance of our devotional service, then we can also become a casualty. It is said that if one is casual, he will become a casualty. So we have to be very serious. That is why it is said serious devotional service. So it is recommended that one engage very seriously in the devotional service of the Lord. That means, how can it happen? One should not think that he is a proprietor, or he is the benefactor, or he is a friend, or he is an enjoyer. He should always be cognizant or be aware that the real enjoyer is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the principle of Bhakti Yoga. Now, coming to Krishna as the Supreme Enjoyer, the Lord himself says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 24, I am the only enjoyer and master of all sacrifices. Therefore, those who do not recognize my true transcendental nature fall down. So we must understand that the Lord, his activities, his pastimes are of transcendental nature. And those who don't those who don't recognize this, they definitely fall into this material world. So Krishna is the only enjoyer and he is the master of all sacrifices. Then Krishna, anyone who can enjoy. So there is a definition in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Any person who is always joyful and untouched by any distress is said to be happy and joyful. That means one is not touched by distress at all. Whereas if you look at conditioned shows like us, we might think that I'm enjoying, but that is also illusory, because if it is true, they must be eternally enjoying. For example, we might buy a very expensive garment and wear it, but if you wear it every day, then you don't feel that pleasure at all like what you feel for the first few days. So similarly, everything in this material world is temporary, asat. So one must take shelter of sat, which is temporary. But as far as Krishna's enjoyment is concerned, it is mentioned that Krishna's garments or ornaments, which decorated the bodies of Krishna and his queens, were beyond the dreams of even Kuvera, who is the treasurer of the heavenly kingdom. And similarly, the dancing before the doors of Krishna's palaces could not be even imagined by the demigods in the heavenly kingdom. So in the heavenly kingdom, Indra normally always sees the dancing of the society girls. But even Indra could not imagine how beautiful were the dances that were performed outside the palace of Krishna, where there were many, many Gauri. Gauri means actually white woman. So Lord Shiva's wife is also called Gauri. But these beautiful women residing within the palace of Krishna were so much whiter than Gauri that they were compared to the moonshine, and they were constantly visible to Krishna. So Krishna was enjoying. So this conception of enjoyment, this is the conception of enjoyment. That means we falsely tend to see false beauty and false riches. But all these were present in Krishna during his time in all the palaces also, which defeated even the imagination of Kuvera, or Lord Indra, or even Lord Shiva. Not only this, even a slight distress could not touch Krishna. One time, many gopis went to the palace where the Brahmanas were performing sacrifices, and they told them, dear wives of the Brahmanas, you must know that not even a slight smell of distress can touch Krishna. He knows no loss, he knows no defamation, he has no fear, he has no anxiety, and he does not know any calamity. He is simply encircled by the dancers and is enjoying everyone's company. So Krishna does not have any distress, whereas we have loss, we sometimes become defamed also, we have fear, and we have anxiety. Why we have anxiety? Because we have material possession. There is a tendency to be thinking that what will happen to this, what will happen, how can I keep this, how can I keep that? You can imagine, sometimes today we see many, many millionaires and billionaires. Their concern is not how they earn, but to keep what they have. Because one common example we see is that extortion. People extort money from very rich people. If you don't have that much of money, you won't have such extortion at all. So it is more difficult to keep what you have struggled to earn in your hard life, earn very hard in your life. So, but Krishna has got everything possible. At the same time, he does not have any attachment to anything. That is why he doesn't have a distress. But we have attachment. That's why it is called hankering and lamentation. First we hanker, and once we get it, then we lament when we lose it. So this is one of the reasons. Then it is mentioned that we consider ourselves to be the supreme proprietor, whereas Krishna is the only supreme proprietor. There is no other proprietor. Nothing belongs to us. Everything is given to us by Krishna to facilitate for us to use them in Krishna's service. So there are some quotes in the Shastras, in the seventh canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where the demigods are offering prayers to Lord Narasimha. Indra, the king of heaven, says, "O Supreme One, these demons took our share of participation in the performance of ritualistic sacrifices. But simply by your appearance as Lord Narasimha, you have saved us from terrible fears. Actually, our shares in these performances are due to you only, because you are the supreme enjoyer of all sacrifices. You are the super soul of every living entity. Therefore, you are the actual owner of everything." So, when the demigods who award these benedictions to living entities like us, if they are offering prayers to Lord Narasimha, saying that everything belongs to you and you are the only super soul and you are only the enjoyer of all sacrifices, what to talk about us? We are too insignificant. Then they say, long were our hearts always filled with the fear of this demon Hiranyakashipu, but you are so kind towards us that by killing him, you have removed all the fear from our hearts and have given us a chance to place your lordship within our heart. So the Lord is present in our heart as the super soul, but we don't understand that. But for those who are engaged in transcendental loving service of the Lord, they pray that for persons who are engaged in transcendental service, all the opulences which were taken away from us by the demons are counted as nothing. Devotees, they say devotees do not even care for liberation. What to speak of material opulences? Actually, we are not enjoyers of the fruit of sacrifices. Our only duty is to always be engaged in your service, or you are the enjoyer of everything. The purport is that right from Indra, the king of heaven, to Brahma, down to the insignificant living entities, we have nothing in our possession. All these are temporary in us. Actually, the real proprietor of everything, including the whole universe, which has been created by Lord Brahma, it is only the Supreme Lord Krishna who is the supreme proprietor. So all these are meant to be offered to Krishna, the personality of Godhead. By doing so, then automatically everyone gets the benefit of it. The given to nice foodstuff is cooked and collected and then offered and then given to our stomach. Automatically, what food is given to the stomach, all the parts of the body, they enjoy that benefit. Similarly, etc. So there is no need to separately water any twig. Another example that is given is that about our dwelling. Now, if we see the building where we might stay, it is made of bricks, wood, stone, iron, cement, so many material things. And actually, if you look at all these things, even a brick, we cannot claim. A labor cannot claim that he has made that brick on his own. Lord has given him the material. Lord has given him the capacity. We cannot create earth, we cannot create water, because we might think water is in plenty, but how many times it has happened that we have run into scarcity of water or scarcity of important items. So nothing belongs to us, everything is created by the Lord. When everything is created by the Lord, everything belongs to him only. So the Ishopanishad, it says that Isha Vasham Dam Sarvan. Everything animate or inanimate belongs to the Supreme Lord only. But the root of the sin is our deliberate disobedience to the laws of nature, disregarding the proprietorship of the Lord. The moment we think that we are the proprietor, then we develop attachment to these things. But the moment we consider that the Lord is the supreme proprietor, we will not be attached to it. Now we are attached. Then the next point that is mentioned is that We think we are the friend of all living entities. If we are the friend, we should be in a position to do everything what anyone wants, but we can't do that. But Krishna is the only supreme friend. And this is also mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 29, where the Lord says, I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all. But whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend. He is in me, and I am also a friend to him. That means when one renders devotion service to the Lord becomes a friend of ours, and we are a friend to him also. So when we consider that the Lord is the real enjoyer, the real proprietor, then that is what is called detachment or vairagya. So instead of being absorbed in material lordships, when one engages in Krishna consciousness, automatically the consciousness is controlled. When consciousness is controlled, mind is controlled, intelligence is controlled, and senses are also under control. Now, the next point that Srila Prabhupada mentions in this purport is that not only should one understand these principles himself, but he should try to convince others and propagate Krishna consciousness. Because when we try to preach, then we have to practice also. It cannot happen that we preach something and we practice something. So the emphasis is given on preaching this Krishna consciousness to others. And the Lord also tells in Bhagavad Gita, the 18th chapter, that for one who explained the secret, supreme secret to devotees, pure devotional service is guaranteed, and at the end, he will come back to me. That means when one explains the secret of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam to others, then we are a friend to him, a real friend. And then pure devotional service is guaranteed to us also. And at the end, we will go back to the spiritual world. Then the Lord in the next verse says, there is no servant in this world more dear to me than he, nor will there ever be one more dear. Now, we might think I'm very dear to somebody, or someone is very dear to me, but that lasts for a few days, few months, or few years. It never lasts so long. But one who explains the teachings of Bhagavad Gita to the others, then Krishna says there is no servant who is more dear to him than the one who is preaching. So this is real yoga. Yoga means to control the senses by practicing devotion service. So yoga means to control the senses. The senses cannot, the engagement of the senses cannot be stopped, but they can be diverted because the senses are always active. So they have to be engaged in devotion service instead of material activities. Now, if we see, now here Srila Prabhupada mentions about Vishwamitra. He was a very great yogi and he was deep in meditation. But the moment he heard the ankling of the twinkling of the ankle bells of Menaka, immediately his meditation was disturbed. So, irrespective of whatever process one might take, unless and until one's mind and consciousness is fully engaged in devotion service, there is always an opportunity for the mind to become occupied with desires for sense gratification. The Srimad Bhagavatam 4th canto, there is also a very nice example of a woman in the name of Shrita. Now, generally it is said that a woman becomes very beautiful when she gives birth to a child. So it is very natural for a woman to give birth to a child. It's a natural function also. But after she gives birth to a child, she becomes more and more beautiful. So in the case of this Shrita, she was very so beautiful that she attracted the whole universe at her marriage ceremony. So she attracted all the learned and exalted demigods simply by the tinkling of her ankle bells. So this indicates that even all the demigods wanted to see her beauty completely, but they were not able to see it because she was fully dressed and covered with ornaments. So since they could see only the feet of Shrita, they became attracted by her ankle bells, which tinkled as she walked. So in other words, even the demigods became captivated by simply hearing the tinkling of her ankle bells. They did not have to see her beauty, but just hearing her tinkling of the ankle bells was enough for them to get attracted. So that is why it is said that a lusty person, it is said that even a common person can become lusty by just hearing the noise of the bangles of a woman or tinkling of the ankle bells or by seeing a woman's sari. So that is why it is said that one should be very careful to be not associated with Maya. And the example of Vishwamitra was given. Once one is, but on the other hand, if one is attracted by the beauty of Krishna, then automatically the illusory energy of the Lord cannot attract him anymore. For example, Haridas Thakur was a pure devotee of the Lord, and he was allured at the middle of the night by Maya herself, but still she could not induce him because he was a very great devotee. Therefore, she could not lay a trap to Haridas Thakur. Another nice example is given in Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th canto, where example of Shaubarya Muni is given. Now, this Shaubarya Muni was very deeply engaged in austerity, deep in the water of river Yamuna. So at that time, when he was deeply in meditation, he actually saw a pair of fish were engaged in sexual affairs. When he saw the pleasure that they were deriving out of this, he was induced by this desire. And then he left his austerity and went to a king called King Mandata. He had many beautiful daughters. So he approached them to marry one of his daughters. The king said, you can take any one of my daughters whom you feel, depending on their personal selection. So, but he was not accepted because he was, like Muni. Those days, Munis were long beards and all those things. He was not looking very attractive. So he was not accepted by anybody. So Shaubarya Muni thought, I'm now very feeble because of my old age. My hair has also become very gray. My skin is black. My head is also trembling. So he said, but besides, I'm a yogi. Now, since the king's daughter rejected me, let me try to reform my body in such a way that even celestial women get attracted to me. So Shaubarya Muni, by his austerities, he had some yogic power. So then he suddenly transformed himself to a very young and a beautiful person. And this time he went back to the same king and he approached the king. And then when he approached the king said the same thing. At that time, it is said that the king had 50 daughters, and the Shaubarya Muni became so attracted that all of them, they wanted to marry him, and they married him because they wanted him as a husband. So they all married him. And then what happens over a period of time, when the question of sense gratification came, all the wives gave up their sisterly relationship. They were not worried about their relationship as sisters, but they quarreled about them within themselves, each one thinking that this man is suitable for me only, not for you. So in this way, there was a great disagreement. But Shaubarya Muni, what happened was he was very great in chanting, expert in chanting mantras. So he utilized, tried to use, though he had a lot of opulences, etc. He utilized everything in the service of the Lord. He engaged his family also in the service of the Lord. Then one day he was sitting alone, all alone, chanting mantras. At that time, he thought, what was the reason for my fall down and coming to this situation where everyone was fighting and I have to, today maintaining even one wife is difficult, but he had 50 wives. And with all of them quarreling, he was very deeply disturbed. So at that time, when he was sitting himself alone in a park, he was thinking that what was the reason for my fall down? So he says, alas, while practicing austerity, even within the depths of the water, and while observing all the rules and regulations practiced by saintly person, I lost the results of my long austerities simply by association with the sexual affairs of fish. So he repented that just by contemplating on the pleasure that was derived by the fish by sexual affairs, he was disturbed and he lost the results of the long austerities that he performed. He says everyone should observe this fall down and learn from it. A person desiring liberation from material bondage must give up the association of persons interested in sex life and should not employ his senses externally in seeing, hearing, talking, walking, and so on. So he says that one should not only not engage, but also one should not contemplate on others, seeing others or engage in such talks or activities. Then he says one should always stay in a secluded place, completely fixed his mind at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And if one at all wants any association, he associates with persons similarly engaged. So he says that one should not associate with such mainly materialistic person, rather one should engage with devotees of the Lord. Then he says, in the beginning I was alone and engaged in performing the austerities of mystic yoga, but later, because of the association of fish engaged in sex, I desired to marry. Then I became the husband of 50 wives, and in each of them I begot 100 sons, and thus my family increased to 5,000 members. So Shaubari from a single person, his family got extended to 5,000 members, which I mentioned at the beginning of the class, extended family. Then he says, by the influence of the modes of material nature, I became fallen and thought that I would be happy in material life. So Shaubari also thought that he would be very happy in material life, trying to enjoy with 50 wives and 100 children. So thus, he says, there is no need, there is no end to my material desire for enjoyment in this life and the next. And in this way, he says, I pass my life in household affairs for some time. But then what happens when one tries to enjoy material life? A point comes because everything is temporary, like I mentioned, asat. They are not permanent. Then Saubari Mani became detached from material enjoyment because he felt that what is there? So all our temporary illusory happiness remains temporary for a period of time. That is all, not for a very long time. So Saubari Muni became detached from this material enjoyment. He accepted Vanaprastha order and went to the forest. Then his devoted wives also followed him because they had no other shelter than their husband. But nowadays, things are very difficult. Someone might be happy with her husband for a short period of time. Then, because what happens is that they feel it is temporary, they need to look for another husband to get new happiness. It's the current trend. But this is what Shaubari realized, that his wives realized that for them that there is no other shelter for them other than one husband. So Shaubari was quite conversant with himself. He went to the forest, and ultimately he left his body, and his wives also were able to enter into the spiritual world by his spiritual power. So because Shaubari had his power in himself, his wives could also go back to the spiritual world. So actually we are all Satchidananda. We are Sat, that means we are eternal, and we are full of knowledge, and we also have Ananda, on the pleasure. But because we desire to enjoy, our mind is attracted by this Asat, temporary material existence. So we have to be practicing devotional service. The mind has to be fixed at the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. So the example is given that one has a quote from Srimad Bhagavatam, Savaimana Krishna Padaravindev. So Maharaj Ambrisha, he engaged all the parts of his body in the service of Krishna. He used to walk to the temples. Nowadays, even with cars or scooters, we are reluctant to go to the temples. But Maharaj Ambrisha was a great example whereby he would walk to the temple of the Lord. He would use his hands in cleaning the temple. He would feel the sense of touch by touching the body of devotees of the Lord. He would smell by smelling the tulasi that is offered to the Lord. He would taste only Krishna Prasada. This way, all his bodies were perfect, parts of his body were perfectly used in the service of Krishna. This is an example. So one has to take shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna and none else. So there is another example given in Srimad Bhagavatam, where one time Queen Rukmini, she was serving her husband, she was fanning her husband, and all of a sudden the Lord took that chamara from her, and then the Lord casually started speaking to her. My dear princess, many kings were there who were wanting to take you as, and they were all as rulers of planets, and they were all had abundant political influence, wealth, etc. But why did you reject them? And you particularly, even in fact, your brother and father offered to them, you to them, that is Shishupal. Why did you choose us who are not even equal to you? So when Krishna started speaking like this, then Krishna actually wanted to tease her. So Rukmini fainted on hearing this, and then seeing her, the Lord pulled her up with his 4 hands and caressed her. He said, "Don't be displeased. I was only joking with you." So at that time, she gave up all her fear because she thought maybe the Lord will leave her and go. So at that time, Rukmini says, "What you have told is true. I am indeed unsuitable for a personality of Godhead like you. What is the comparison of me compared to the Lord, who is the master of all the deities, the owner of everything and all everything that belongs to this world? So whose feet, now who am I whose feet are grasped by fools?" So Rukmini humbly admits, after all, my feet are grasped by fools. Then she says, "Your movements, even for sages who relish the honey of your lotus feet, are certainly incomprehensible for human beings who behave like animals." He says that great sages take shelter of your lotus feet. Want to talk about us or other human beings who behave like animals? Then she says, "Just as your activities are transcendental, so are your followers." So devotee, the Lord is transcendental, and so are his followers. Then she says, "You possess nothing because there is nothing beyond you. And those who are blinded by their wealth and gratifying their senses do not recognize you in the form of death." That means she's admitting that those who do not recognize the Lord as the owner of everything, they see the Lord in the form of death. Then she says, "The aroma of your lotus feet, which is glorified by great saints, awards people liberation." But just by smelling the aroma of the Lord's lotus feet, or even by smelling the tulsi that is offered to the Lord's lotus feet, can give liberation one to that person who is smelling. Then she says, "What woman would take shelter of any other man after savoring that aroma?" That means one who smells the fragrance of the tulsi or flowers offered to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, what other shelter will such a person take? Then she says, "Because you are suitable to me, I have chosen you. May your feet, which give freedom from illusion, give shelter to me." So we are all taking shelter of illusory energy of the Lord. So Rukmini herself is seeking shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Yeah. Then she says, "A woman who fails to relish the fragrance of the honey of your lotus feet becomes totally befooled, and thus she accepts her husband or a lover, a living corpse covered with skin, nails, head, and body, and hair filled with flesh, bones, blood, parasites, faces, feces, mucus, bile, and air." So she says, one who does not relish the fragrance of the honey of the lotus feet of the Lord, such a person becomes fooled. And what he does, such a person takes shelter of a materialistic person. Both a woman might take shelter of a man, or a man might take shelter of a woman. But in either case, they are like a living corpse. Living corpse means they are like a living dead body covered with skin, nails, body, hair, flesh, etc. Our body is, like I mentioned, asat, made up of these temporary things like bones, flesh, blood, etc. If you look at, if somebody gets injured and blood comes out of his body, we don't want to see that person's blood coming out, because we develop, seeing that red thing, we develop an aversion. But outside, our body looks very beautiful because uh, people decorate themselves with so many creams and polishes and this and that. So many things are there today to make one's body beautiful. But all this, as this verse mentions, is nothing but a living corpse. That means a living dead body. Then she says, "Though you are satisfied within yourself and rarely turn your attention to me, please bless me and steady love for your lotus feet." She's not even asking for Krishna to see her, to see him. But she says, "Though you are satisfied within yourself and rarely turn your attention to me, please bless me with steady love for your lotus feet." So she's asking that she may be blessed by the love for Krishna's lotus feet. So the point is that either one takes shelter of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, otherwise, if one does not take shelter of Krishna, then one has to take shelter of other all illusory beings in the products or materials in this world. So this is how Srila Prabhupada finally says that one can bring this detachment by artificial detachment attachment that we have got, by bringing detachment by taking up the process of devotional service. It is not possible to stop the senses, but one can control the senses by taking up engaging the senses in the process of devotional service. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada says that one has to fix the mind at the lotus feet of Krishna, then everything will be nice. Thus, the seriousness of Bhakti Yoga is emphasized. So, the example, like I mentioned, was Parikshit Maharaj. He was able to give up all deep-rooted affection for his personal body, his wife, his children, his palace, his animals, the animals that he had, like horses and elephants. Treasury, he had big treasury, his friends, and all the undisputed kingdom that he had. He was able to give up all this because Parishit Maharaj was only a great devotee of the Lord. And then it did not take time for him to give up these things because right from his birth he was a devotee. The moment he realized that he has to leave his body, he gave up everything. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is mentioned as to how a great soul like Parishit Maharaj, constantly in rapt thought of Lord Krishna, knowing well of his imminent death, renounced all sorts of fruitive activities, acts of religion, economic development, sense gratification, and became firmly fixed on natural love for Krishna. So the point is that if one takes up the process of devotional service, automatically one will be able to give up these artificial illusory attachments that we all have developed in our conditional life, that we have become attached to through so many births that we have gone through. With this, I conclude the class for today. If anyone has got any questions, any comments, they can ask me in the next couple of minutes. Any questions? Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam, Prabhu. Any questions, Prabhu?
No, Prabhuji, Hare Krishna.
Okay, thank you all very much. Can I leave the class? Can I leave, Prabhu? If I can take the classes close, if there is no questions, comments.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam.
Dandavat Pranam, Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Dandavat Pranam, Prabhuji.
Dandavat Pranam, Prabhu. Dandavat Pranam. So thank you all very much. Granthraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you, dear devotees. We'll see you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.